The bell had already rung by the time I pushed open the heavy classroom door. The sound of chairs scraping and pens scratching filled the air, but all of it seemed to pause when her voice cut through. "You're late again." Her words weren't shouted, but they carried the kind of weight that makes your stomach twist. She stood at the front of the room, one hand resting lightly on the desk, the other adjusting the glasses that had slipped down the bridge of her nose. She was 40, maybe 41, with the kind of presence that silenced the room without effort. There was no harshness in her tone, only a measured disappointment that somehow pierced deeper than anger ever could. Heat rushed to my face as a few classmates exchanged smirks, hiding quiet laughter behind their hands. I mumbled an apology, sliding into the nearest empty seat, but my gaze couldn't help drifting back to her. It wasn't just the authority she carried that held me there. It was the small details, the faint tiredness beneath her eyes, the way her dark hair was gathered loosely at the back of her neck, a strand curling free against her cheek. The pale silk blouse she wore caught the afternoon light, softening the sharp lines of her shoulders. She didn't try to dress young, she didn't need to. Her grace was its own kind of beauty. She moved on with the lesson, her voice steady, layered with that calm cadence that made every word sink in deeper than the textbooks ever could. And though I kept my head bent over my notes, I found myself listening less to the subject and more to the rhythm of her speech. There was something steadying in it, something that eased the restless hum inside me. But every so often, her eyes would sweep across the room and catch mine. It was never long, a second, maybe two, before she moved on. Still, each glance seemed to say more than the words she gave aloud. Not condemnation, not even frustration, but something softer. A kind of question she never voiced. The room smelled faintly of chalk dust and coffee. The clock ticked in steady rhythm on the wall, yet time felt suspended in those fleeting moments of eye contact. She was my teacher, yes, but sitting there, late again, and feeling the heat of her gaze linger just a little longer than necessary, I realized there was something else between us. Something neither of us had dared name yet. When the final bell rang, the room erupted into movement, chairs dragging, backpacks zipping, voices bouncing off the walls. I stayed quiet, keeping my head down, but out of the corner of my eye I saw her glance at me again. "Stay after class," she said softly, almost as though it were meant for me alone. One by one, the students filed out, their chatter fading down the hallway until only the sound of the ticking clock remained. The room felt larger now, emptier, and yet the air between us seemed heavier. She leaned against her desk, folding her arms, her expression unreadable. "You've been late too many times," she began, her voice steady. But unlike in front of the others, there was no sharpness here. Instead, it felt like a question she hadn't yet asked. "Why?" I shifted in my chair, my hands restless against the notebook in front of me. I wanted to shrug it off, to laugh it away, but her gaze made it impossible. She wasn't looking at me as a teacher ticking off a rule. She was looking at me as if she genuinely cared to know. I cleared my throat. "I work nights, sometimes longer than I should. By the time morning comes, I'm running on fumes. I try, but," my voice cracked, betraying the exhaustion I usually tried so hard to mask. Her expression softened, though she didn't move from where she stood. She tilted her head slightly, the light from the window catching the frame of her glasses. For a moment, she looked less like the strict figure at the front of the class and more like someone caught between duty and empathy. "I see," she said quietly. There was no judgment in her tone. Just understanding. She let out a breath, lowering her arms, her fingers brushing the edge of the desk. For a second, I thought she might step closer, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned back, her eyes lingering on me with something I couldn't quite name. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the fluorescent light above us. My chest tightened under the weight of it, and yet I didn't want it to end. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter now. "You can't keep burning yourself out like this. You're young, but even the young have limits." The way she said it, the softness, the hidden care, made my pulse quicken. She wasn't just a teacher correcting me. She was a woman who noticed. A woman who, for reasons I couldn't explain, wanted to understand me. I thought the conversation would end there, with her giving one last warning before sending me on my way. But she didn't dismiss me. She stayed leaning against her desk, her arms uncrossed now, her eyes distant as though she were weighing something heavier than my lateness. "You know," she said after a pause, her voice lower than before, "when I was about your age, I was juggling more than I could handle too. School, family, a job I hated. I barely slept. I thought if I kept pushing, I could carry it all without breaking." Her gaze wasn't on me anymore, it was on the window, where late afternoon sunlight poured through the blinds, striping her blouse with faint gold. For the first time, she looked less like the untouchable figure at the front of the classroom and more like a woman remembering something fragile. "What happened?" I asked softly, surprising even myself. She gave a small laugh, one without humor. "I broke, of course. Life has a way of forcing you to stop when you won't stop yourself." Her fingers toyed absently with a strand of hair that had slipped free, tucking it behind her ear, though the motion carried a faint tremor. "I don't talk about it much. Not here. Not with anyone." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the desk. For a moment, I forgot she was my teacher. She was just someone letting me see behind the glass. "That sounds lonely," I murmured. Her eyes flicked to mine, and something unspoken passed between us. Not pity, not even sympathy, something quieter, deeper. Recognition, maybe. Two lives on different paths, but carrying the same kind of weight. It was, she admitted, her voice softening further. "And sometimes, it still is." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was gentle, like a fragile thread stretched between us. I could feel my heart beating louder than the ticking clock above the door. I wanted to say something to ease the sadness in her eyes, but the words stuck. All I could do was hold her gaze. The light shifted again, glinting across her glasses. She blinked, as if suddenly remembering who she was supposed to be, and straightened her posture. But the glimpse was already given. For a fleeting moment, she had let me see not the teacher, but the woman beneath. And I couldn't forget it. The following days carried a strange quiet between us. She didn't mention our conversation again, and I didn't either, yet something unspoken lingered every time I entered the classroom. Her voice still held authority, but I noticed the subtle shifts, the softer pauses when her eyes flicked toward me, the slight way her expression eased if she caught me actually on time. That afternoon, as the others rushed out, I stayed back to gather my things. My notebook slipped from the desk, the worn cover skidding across the floor. I bent quickly to pick it up, only to find another hand reaching at the same moment. Her hand. Our fingers brushed, a fleeting contact, but enough to send a spark up my arm. Her skin was warm, softer than I expected, her nails neatly trimmed with the faintest shine. For half a heartbeat, neither of us moved. We stayed there, caught in the accident of closeness, as though the world had stilled to see what we would do. When our eyes lifted, they met directly. Her gaze wasn't stern or guarded. It was startled, yes, but softened by something else, something she was fighting to conceal. My pulse quickened, thudding so loud I was sure she could hear it. Slowly, she withdrew her hand, closing the distance with careful restraint. She straightened, clearing her throat, though her movements lacked their usual composure. "Be more careful," she said quietly, but the words didn't land as a scolding. They landed like a whisper she needed to fill the silence. I rose too, clutching the notebook a little too tightly. "Sorry," I murmured, though it wasn't the book I was apologizing for. The room felt different then, smaller, almost too close, as if the walls leaned in to keep the secret between us. The clock ticked, the hum of the light above continued, but everything else blurred. My chest tightened with a strange mix of guilt and wonder, as though I had stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to find, yet couldn't bear to step away from. She adjusted the papers on her desk, avoiding my eyes, though I noticed the faint pink rising along her cheekbones. She wasn't immune. That realization sank deep, dangerous and comforting all at once. When I finally left the room, the ghost of her touch still lingered against my skin, and I knew this wasn't something I could forget. The rain came suddenly that afternoon, the kind of downpour that blurs the world into a wash of silver. Students huddled under the overhang, waiting for the storm to pass, but I had no time to wait. My bag was already soaked, the stack of books inside pressing heavy against my shoulder as I pushed out into it. I was halfway across the parking lot when I heard her voice behind me. "You'll ruin those books if you keep going." I turned, blinking through the sheets of rain. She stood by her car, umbrella in hand, her blouse already dotted with water from the short walk. Her hair clung slightly to her temples, but she didn't seem to care. She gestured to the passenger side with a tilt of her head. "Come on. I'll drive you home." Every part of me hesitated, but the rain left little room for pride. I jogged toward her, sliding into the seat as she folded her umbrella and shook droplets from it. The car was warm, filled with the subtle fragrance of her perfume, something floral, understated, and immediately disarming. For a moment, we said nothing. The storm hammered the roof, the wipers swiping rhythmically across the glass. Then, as she pulled onto the road, her voice broke through. "You work nights, don't you?" she asked gently, eyes fixed ahead. I nodded, brushing water from my sleeve. "Yeah. I don't have much choice." Her grip tightened slightly on the wheel. "That's a lot for someone your age." I glanced at her profile, the curve of her jaw lit by the glow of passing streetlights. "And for someone your age, carrying everyone else's problems can't be easy either," I said before I could stop myself. She exhaled, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "You notice too much." The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was thick with things unsaid, with truths neither of us dared name. My hand brushed against the sleeve of her coat when she passed me a tissue from the console. Even that slight contact carried weight, making my pulse stumble. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, it felt like we were suspended in a small, sealed world, just the two of us, our secrets humming quietly between us. She was my teacher, and I was her student, but in that car, in that moment, those roles blurred into something neither of us could define. And neither of us wanted to. The ride became a quiet ritual after that storm. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough that it began to feel natural. Sometimes she'd ask if I needed a lift, sometimes she didn't, and yet somehow, I always found myself walking toward her car when the halls had emptied. That night, though, was different. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets slick with reflections of amber streetlights. Inside the car, the air felt charged, though neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. The faint hum of the heater filled the silence. I could see her fingers resting on the steering wheel, steady but tense. "Thank you," I said finally, breaking the stillness. My voice sounded rougher than I intended. Not just for the rides. For noticing. For caring. She glanced at me briefly, then back to the road. Her lips pressed together, as though weighing the risk of answering. "It's what I'm supposed to do. You're my student." But her tone betrayed her, softer, hesitant, almost pleading with herself to believe it. I turned slightly in my seat, watching the way the passing light brushed her face in gold, then shadow. "No," I said quietly. "You do more than that. You listen. You see me, even when no one else does." Her hands tightened on the wheel. I thought she might tell me to stop, to draw the boundary sharp and clear. Instead, her voice cracked in a way I had never heard before. "Do you know how long it's been since someone has said that to me?" she whispered. I swallowed, my chest tightening at the tremor in her words. She slowed the car, pulling into a quiet side street, the engine humming low. For a moment, she just sat there, her shoulders rising and falling with a breath that seemed to carry years of weight. "You make me feel seen again," she said finally, barely louder than the rain dripping from the trees outside. Her eyes didn't meet mine right away, but when they did, the vulnerability in them struck deeper than anything she had confessed before. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. The space between us felt alive, heavy with the kind of truth that changes everything. My heart pounded, every beat echoing the pull of those words. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just my anchor. I was hers too. The car sat in silence, engine humming softly, windows fogged faintly at the edges. Her confession still lingered in the air, fragile and undeniable. I could feel the weight of it pressing against us, the truth neither of us could take back. She rested her hands in her lap now, no longer gripping the wheel, her gaze fixed on the glow of the street lamp outside. "This isn't how things are supposed to be," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "There are lines I shouldn't cross." I nodded, though my chest ached with the thought of letting the moment fade. "I know," I whispered. "But, sometimes the heart doesn't care about lines." Her eyes flicked to mine then, searching, testing the honesty in my words. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, not teacher and student, not older and younger, but simply two people, bound by something neither of us had expected. I gave a small, uncertain smile, the kind that carried both apology and hope. "Better late than never with you," I said, echoing the words that had once been a careless excuse but now felt like a truth I could live by. Her expression shifted, the tension in her brow softening, the corners of her lips tugging upward despite herself. It wasn't the smile she gave in the classroom, polished and professional. It was smaller, more vulnerable, almost shy. And it was beautiful. She reached across the console, hesitating only for a second before resting her hand over mine. Her palm was warm, steady, grounding me in a way nothing else had. The simple touch spoke louder than anything words could carry. It wasn't passion, it wasn't surrender, it was acknowledgement. Acceptance. I didn't move closer, didn't push for more. I only turned my hand slightly, letting my fingers close gently around hers. For the first time in a long while, I felt still. Whole. The world outside carried on, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of passing cars, but inside, there was only the quiet thrum of shared breath and the steady beat of something new forming between us. We sat there for a while, saying nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Whatever this was, whatever it might become, it was ours to hold. And in that moment, it was enough.